Switch users be like, oh, at least Sonic Generations is portable now. I can go anywhere with it. You know what else I can take with me anywhere I go? My clinical depression. Sonic X Shadow Generations almost immediately became one of the highest rated Sonic games of all time. Not only is it a port of one of the best Sonic games, but it also includes another game, expansion, let's call it an idea, starring Shadow the Hedgehog. The game sold millions of units within the first few days, which is unheard of for a Sonic game. However, some of those copies weren't the definitive experience. You see, Sonic X Shadow Generations was released on many different consoles with different levels of power and from different console generations, but ironically, the most popular of all of these devices had the worst version of the game: the Nintendo Switch. Now, I've already gone over basically everything there is to talk about for Sonic X Shadow Generations on the original Xbox 360 version and the PS5 remaster. However, I didn't cover the Nintendo Switch version since I received my PS5 review copy far sooner, and that allowed me to talk about the game and get the discussion out to you as soon as possible. Where that said PS5 version and the other current generation versions of the game gave you access to the game in the way it was intended, with a smooth and precise as possible gameplay, the Switch version completely turns that on its head, giving off a choppier experience as well as many other hindrances. The Switch is very well known for being the least powerful console on the market by a landslide. Where it was properly supported during the late life of the PlayStation 4 and the early life of the PlayStation 5, its power was equivalent to that of a PlayStation 3, meaning that any game you throw at it will automatically be the worst version in terms of frame rate and graphics. How much worse varies. Sometimes it's not even noticeable, sometimes it's WWE 2K18. However, all hope was not lost, because a few months after Sonic X Shadow Generations was released, Nintendo would announce the Nintendo Switch 2, promising more reliable hardware and significantly more power, and Sega shortly thereafter would announce countless games for it, including a port of Sonic X Shadow Generations. Therefore, if the Switch 2 reaches a certain threshold, it could easily be the best version of Generations, right? It would have the same specifications of the PS5 and Xbox versions, but portable and seamless. It's a no-brainer, right? It was also a no-brainer that Anakin Skywalker was set to be the greatest Jedi who ever lived, but look where that led him. So join me as we take a look at specifically what's going on with the Nintendo Switch 2 version of Sonic X Shadow Generations, as well as comparing it to the Nintendo Switch 1 version and seeing which version of the game is right to go for. First, let's do a quick recap of what the Nintendo Switch 1 version offers. If you've already played the Switch version and are very familiar with how it works, you can go to this timestamp here. But I wouldn't recommend that because there are certain things that you may not even realize even if you played this version from start to finish. The Switch 1 version had quite understandable expectations. The original Sonic Generations ran at 30 frames per second at a slightly lower resolution than the console's limits on Xbox 360 and PS3. And the remaster on almost every system runs at 60 frames per second. Naturally, since the Switch 1 is somewhat more powerful than both the PS3 and the Xbox 360, it was expected that the Sonic portion of the game on Switch would run at a higher frame rate, and you would expect correctly. Sonic Generations on Switch does in fact run at a frame rate higher than 30. It runs at 31 frames per second. Come on, man, I just asked you to get me a drink and you shoved my face into the water faucet. You'd think that the extra frame would make things feel ever so slightly better, right? Well, no. You see, with an uneven, inconsistent frame rate like 31, running on a Nintendo Switch screen with a refresh rate of 60 frames, the game is going to feel like it stutters all of the time. Therefore, playing the game just doesn't feel as good as it should, and it feels worse than the original in many ways. While it does render at 1080p in docked mode, doubling the original game's rendering scale, and the game isn't visually hindered like other Sonic games on Switch, it still feels worse due to the frame rate. It's really strange that this is the case though, since people who modified their Nintendo Switches uncapped the frame rate in the Sonic portion of the game, and it runs at a flawless 60 frames per second just like the PS5 version. Why? There's literally no reason as to why this game runs like this out of the box. It should easily be able to run at 60. This game is from 2011! Shadow Generations, on the other hand, is a different story. The game runs at a stable 30 frames per second, which is actually the same as the PS4 and the Xbox One versions, and the same as the PS5 and Xbox Series versions when in quality mode. But you wouldn't play in quality mode because that's stupid. The Switch version's load times are also significantly longer, and the visual fidelity speaks for itself. The textures compared to the PS5 version look muddied, and there's a lack of anti-aliasing, which makes the game look incredibly pixelated. And the resolution is lowered to 720p, which is basically dividing Sonic Generations resolution by 2. The game overall just doesn't look here, whereas stages like Radical Highway look fine, Space Colony Arc and Sunset Heights make it obvious where corners had to be cut in order for the game to run consistently. Overall, the Switch 1 version of Sonic X Shadow Generations is far from ideal, but there are things that it does have going for it over the Switch 2 version, which we'll get to later. Speaking of which, the Switch 2 version of the game is an immediately noticeable upgrade. Since it's apparently more powerful than the portable Steam Deck PC machines, expectations were far higher than the original Switch version, and that goes to show with how it runs. Sonic Generations runs flawlessly at around 1440p with anti-aliasing at a mostly locked 60 frames per second. And it's incredible. Having this game run at a smooth frame rate with high quality visuals on a device I can take with me anywhere has been a dream of mine since the idea of the Nintendo Switch was rumored in 2016, and now we finally have it. Handheld mode is basically the same thing, but instead of 1440p, the game runs at 1080p, so no big deal. Sonic Generations on Nintendo Switch 2 is practically flawless. I wonder how Shadow's doing. Okay, well, it's not actually that bad. Shadow Generations on Switch 2 has two separate visual options, Performance Mode and Image Quality Mode, just like the other next-gen versions. Image Quality Mode runs the game at 1080p and 30 FPS, meanwhile the Performance Mode runs the game at 720p, 60 FPS, in both docked and handheld. Yeah, this isn't great at a first glance. There are many instances of artifacting, especially when Shadow's face is visible. The title screens are incredibly crusty, and running this on a 4K display is not the prettiest. However, honestly, there have been moments where I'm playing this version of the game and I forget I'm even playing on a Nintendo Switch, just because of how smooth it is. Plus, I do believe the Steam Deck runs at similar specifications, if not slightly worse, making this probably the best portable version of the game. Yeah, it isn't the prettiest, but for the price of portability, I would much rather have this than the halved frame rate. Overall, Sonic X Shadow Generation seems like a pretty fair package on Switch 2. If you don't own a next-gen console or just want a portable way to play the game, this is the way to do it. Now, if you remember, I mentioned how there were things the Switch 1 version had going for it over the Switch 2 version. What could those possibly be? Carpet stains. Sonic X Shadow Generations on Switch 2 is a game key card. Now, what is a game key card? Essentially, it's a physical version of a game that you have to insert into your console, but doesn't have actual data on it. When you insert the cartridge, you are prompted to download all the data from Nintendo's servers, rather than simply opening it or downloading it from the game card, which is what PlayStation does. Meaning, you need to connect to the internet and download when you insert the card for the first time, which takes away the whole point of the physical game. It's like taking an apple and replacing all of its insides with potato starch. Like, just make them French fries. Nintendo's first-party games don't do this on Switch 2, but nearly every single third-party game does. This is because the game cards that Nintendo provided were way too large for a lot of games, and thus were way too expensive to produce for what the games were worth. So just make it a game key card and save a bunch of money. It makes sense, but it's still stupid. There is really no point to buying this game physically on Switch 2 whatsoever, unless you really think you're gonna sell it to someone. Like, who would genuinely buy this? Don't answer that question. Well, hey, I still have my original Switch 1 version of the game. I can just upgrade that from the eShop like other Switch 1 games for a discounted price, and still own the game physically in a way. Where is the upgrade path? Yep. That's right, if you own the original Switch 1 version of the game, which ran significantly worse than other versions of the game and costed the exact same price as those other versions, you cannot upgrade that version to the Switch 2 version like, I don't know, almost every other Switch 1 game that was ported to the Switch 2? Hogwarts Legacy got an upgrade pack! What is happening? This is an absolutely awful practice from Sega, and honestly, it's probably killing this version of the game. The fact that there were only 3 people on the leaderboards when I was first playing this version says something. Take that, Sam. So, that was a look at the Nintendo Switch 2 version of Sonic X Shadow Generations. Is it worth it? Honestly, if you don't have the original Switch version, I'd say so. Having a portable version of Sonic Generations that runs as smooth as this is a dream come true, and having the latest mainline Sonic game running smoothly on a Nintendo system in the modern day is a crazy sight to behold. resolution aside. This isn't the best version of Sonic X Shadow Generations. Not at all. But it's the best version you can get for the lifestyles these systems are made for. Now, if you already own the Nintendo Switch version, say it with me, boycott! Okay, look, I won't tell anyone if you don't.